generated with the ChatGPT 4.5 AI tool. This is kind of a continuation of the stream I did yesterday, which we talked more about the essence of organizing the information, how to prompt, those sorts of things. And now we're going to actually start looking at the Fantasy Grounds aspect of it after we organize the images. So what I have here is a series of images that I generated in the same conversation with the adventure that I was working on with OpenAI ChatGPT. So these are the images that were generated, also text. You have the adventure itself. There's all kinds of stuff here. Stat blocks, rollable tables, all kinds of things. So this is to make it so that when I go to copy and paste into Fantasy Grounds, a little bit easier. I wouldn't say totally easy, but better than just winging it and trying to do one thing at a time. So in this case, against my best judgment, I went ahead and put everything in one conversation, but I'm doing that to test the limits of the memory of the new ChatGPT 4.5, which I think has improved quite a bit. I mean, I didn't see any a bunch of hallucinating or off-topic content after a while, so that's a good thing. And what I've asked it to do is build an outline, and then we worked on different elements like stat blocks, such as the minions, the big bad evil guy, just all kinds of stuff. And then we also did stat blocks, and then we did some like a single stat block for a bunch of hazards and traps. And then we're doing the we're going to do the items, if there are any. There's a couple items I might build. There's a hammer that's kind of magical, and then there's some sort of other smaller items that I might build, but other than that, I'll just use standard SRD equipment. Because like I said in the other video before, from yesterday on the 12th of April, I do not want to build hundreds of items. That just takes way too long, and it's probably not worth it in most cases. So it's only if you really need to use the item in the game and as part of the plot maybe. But nonetheless, I'm going to go through this and start working on images. So what I did is I copied and pasted different images that were generated in ChatGPT. So everything here that you see was generated in ChatGPT. So I wanted to get some adventure page elements. So what I'm going to do with these is put them in the reference manual or the book in Fantasy Grounds. So I can use each one of these as like a header block or maybe at the base or both. And then I also have some vertical ones, so I can use these as borders if I need to. And then I got some handouts that pertain to the adventure. So this is different handouts that I can use throughout the game to help tell the story visually. So you don't need a handout for every single thing, but anything that had text or some sort of significance to the adventure, like clues and such, then I went ahead and made those or I requested those to be made into images. So these are all the different images that came out of ChatGPT, which I'm pretty impressed because it was able to maintain a lot of the consistency that I'm looking for. And that was one of the big things about AI tools. It's very inconsistent. So like this is a Dwarven Gate handout. And if you go to this next image, the artwork looks very similar. It's not totally different like you could get before. And what's also nice is since I'm using a program like Canva, I can cut out the background if I want. So just as an example, I can make a duplicate of this handout. And then I can click on the image and then click on background remover. And sometimes it will nicely remove all that background. So now I have like a standee. So I'll make this number 2. And then this one will be number 1. So I might use that particular image in another part of the adventure. And it gives me options. So I don't necessarily have to include the background. So I can even use it as one of those 3D token things that you can use in 2D mode if you want. And then these are just different images of different scenes that come up in the adventure. So the adventure that I put together and I used AI is basically a dungeon crawl. It's a dwarven sage who wants the characters or the players to go and research and go into this vault that was lost many years ago. It's probably from the ancient Delzoon dwarves or something like that. And when you get there, you find out there's kobolds who have infiltrated this place. But the big bad evil is this behair creature. It's kind of like a reptilian dragon thing that shoots lightning. And they think it's a god, like they're kind of enamored with it. They think it was sent by their god to punish people who don't believe in it or something like that. And they kind of scavenge around on the outer parts of this dwarven vault. But deep within, there's like a passageway that's full of statues, and there's ghosts of dwarves. If you pass that, then you can get into the deeper parts where there's a magical hammer that was infused with electricity. It was actually a gift from storm giants. There was a ancient kind of a meeting that went down, and it didn't go too well, and they had this big battle, and it was kind of a disaster. But nonetheless, there was also a big earthquake. So after the big earthquake, which happened years later, but after that, that was kind of the nail in the coffin. So the dwarves who lived there abandoned the vault. They felt that it was kind of cursed, and they have a lot of bad memories, and they kind of wanted to just walk away from this mess. So that's what happened to this dwarven hall. But here's the magical storm hammer. It's just a magical +1 hammer. But when you actually use it, if you strike an opponent or hit them, you do your regular bludgeoning damage, and it does an additional 1d6 electric or basically lightning damage. So nothing real special, but it's kind of cool. It's got kind of a thematic thing to it. And what I didn't want to do is create an anti-bad guy weapon, right? Because I've seen that a lot where when you go into this adventure, they'll put something in place like a bunch of potions right before right after a battle. I don't mind one or two, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the adventure in a sense. So if I made this like a behair slayer or something like that, it's kind of corny. I don't really like that too much. I kind of want the players to have this fight, and I don't necessarily expect them to win because they're only like 4th level. So they'll probably have to flee or trap the behair again. So I'm hoping that's how that will play out. But this hammer isn't going to do any extra damage to the behair. He's probably at least resistant to electricity. So this hammer isn't going to defeat that creature. It's just going to be a cool thematic weapon that had something to do with the original meeting that took place between the storm giants and the ancient dwarfs. However, the behair came later, and he was attracted to the electrical remnants that were left over from that battle and from the cursed tomb, I guess. So here's like the throne room where the nest of the behair is. There's the behair itself. So it's kind of a dragon-like thing, more like a snake. And it has lots of legs and it has lightning. Here's the kobold shaman, who may or may not interact with the PCs, depending on what happens in the adventure. And then here's a back cover kind of thing where the behair is eating one of the kobolds. Here, this is kind of a moral thing. So I threw this in there at the very end. So if the players defeat the behair, they see this clutch of eggs in there. So this thing was not only living there because it was attracted to the lightning that left remnants, but it was also nesting. So which really kind of makes you wonder, where's the other one at, right? So I kind of like that. It's kind of a thing like, wow, we just killed the mom. What do we do with the eggs? That kind of thing. And then I requested that it made pogs. It does a pretty good job now with pogs. So here's for the behair. This is a larger pog. This is 512 by 512 because it's a large creature. But all these pogs correspond to the NPCs in the adventure. And those are 256 by 256, which will be converted into WebP format. So these are just some of the tokens, and I made a party token because later on in the adventure, when I want to use the map, and if I share it with the group, I'm just going to move that pog from one location to the next, just so it's kind of like a progress sheet, not really an actual map. And then these are just top-down images that can be used for battle maps, or you could just show them if you want. Like something like this, you can kind of use it as a battle map, but it's more or less kind of showing you the chasm bridge. I always like that, even though it's a kind of a cliche thing. And then these are also just things you can throw down and use them as maps. So I got 2 of these, so I'm going to delete one of them. But this is another view of the chasm bridge in case you want to use it for top down. This is an optional map. This is the rat warrens. There's some rat swarms in here, and you could fall down into a hole, like a sinkhole. Here's another, just a generic cavern map. You can use this for battle. So keeping it simple, you don't need these big elaborate maps, because that's generally what bogs down your sessions if you got all these huge high quality maps. So I just kind of like this more storytelling narrative type stuff. And you can put a grid on here and line of sight and that kind of thing. You can have a little bit of that, but I don't think you need a ton of it. And if you already have assets, you can populate this with other things if need be. I also made a torch pog. So this is in case the players have a light source that is going to be drifting around on the map, or perhaps they throw a torch down on the ground, and I'll assign light to it and just kind of use this as a reference. So when you're going through the adventure, and if someone has that situation, you can use this token and just assign a light to it. You don't even have to put it on the combat tracker, and just move it around on the map, assuming that the players release their light source. So you can actually make a light spell, or you can make a spiritual weapon, whatever you need it to do. But it's nice to have those assets in case you have those situations. So this is more of a just in case thing. Here's the this is not a bat swarm anymore, but this is there's like a small lightning elemental that's guarding the hammer. It's kind of like I guess it's an embodiment of the hammer and whoever forged it, sort of, and it's kind of elemental, but it's not a full-on elemental. It's kind of a smaller one. It's more or less a token guardian. It's not really powerful, but it does have kind of an indirect message for whoever recovers the hammer. So I think the artwork turned out okay, or the rendered images. So I think this would work. Like for a one-shot or maybe a 3-shot, you can certainly do this kind of thing. And what I would do with this is probably render sections of the set at a time, because I don't necessarily want to scale everything at 1024 by 1024. So what I'll do is I'll individually go through and select the range of items that I want to render. Like these first 2, I'm not going to render those. So I also got to remember that I want the background removed from these images. So I click on them to make sure that this removed background is there, because when I render them, I don't want it to show the white background. So that's kind of what. So I'm going to go through these images and make sure that the background's been removed, so that way they're transparent, so it doesn't inherit any of the background noise. So far it looks like I've got most of them, and I'm looking up here at the top there of the screen. Let me put the pointer out so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. So this is up here is where the background remover is. So I'm just going through making sure the background's removed. So when I render these, I don't grab or I don't get the excess. So this one doesn't really need it, I don't think. But just in case, let's see what it does. Yeah, there we go. Just in case. So background remover. That's fine. That one's already removed. Why do we have 2 of these now? Oh, because I accidentally. Let's do that. Yeah, I didn't want to remove the background on this one. Okay. So far, looks good. Some of these don't need the background removed because they're like almost like a full-on handout. So these things are just parts of the adventure that I might share as things go on. This is more like a back cover. You could share this if you were trying to, let's say the shaman was telling a story about how the Behair has punished the non-believers, that kind of thing. There's the eggs and all of these things, these tokens, I believe, are the background has been removed. Yep, So on these things here, what I'll probably do is stretch these all the way out, but then just have it render to the size that I want. So the only exception here would be this image, and I would just make a copy of this and then have it set at 512 by 512. So that way you get the correct size right from the get-go. And then I might do the same for these, like not for the hammer, but for those images that are actually like borders. So I'll probably use those in the reference manual as I'm building it. So when I guess I'm going to kind of make this a series. So I'll import all these images. That's kind of what I start with usually is the images. I think that's the most hassle and work in a lot of cases. So when you are working with, doing a conversion, I would rip all the images out, resize them, give them names. So this says adventure page elements 1 and 2. So I'm not going to render those, but those are part of the project. Stone border 1. So that might be something that you import, but you don't necessarily use it as an asset or something that's in the adventure. It's just part of the construction of the reference manual or the book. So those are just stone borders that I might use for decorative elements. And what's kind of neat about that is you can kind of make like a collage of different things. So if you wanted to combine things, like make a montage, you could. And, one thing I didn't do or I didn't notice is that the cover art, I think I missed that somehow. So I'm going to go back and take a look and see if I have the cover art. Because I swear I asked it to create or generate something for the cover. I don't think I would skip that, but nonetheless, it's something that's not important at the moment, but kind of want to get all that straightened out before I move on because there's a lot to do with this. Let's see, I'm kind of going through ChatGPT. One thing about doing everything in one conversation is that you do a lot of scrolling. So that's what I'm going to be doing once I get into all the text and the stat blocks and such. Is a lot of scrolling. So that kind of, here we go. So Storm Coil of the Dwarven Deep. So I was going to say Delzoon, but I think that's a copyrighted title or name. So I'm going to have to go in and scrub that from the adventure. But with that being said, what I'm going to do is make another section here. So just make a duplicate of this, delete that, hit Control V, change this to front cover, and that's going to be also the file name. So that's another thing that why you'd want to name these aptly is because when you render this is going to be the actual file name. So I'm actually going to go through and rename these. It'll be handout underscore whatever the image is, and then maybe followed by a number. So this way it sorts better when you do import all the images in Fantasy Grounds. So let's take a look at this. So this is the actual cover art, we'll say, and just going to stretch it to where it almost totally encapsulates this whole thing here. So I kind of like that. What I asked for is that it encapsulates what was discussed in the conversation. So here's the NPC. There's like these big dwarven statues from the halls. It looks like there's some kobolds in the background, and you got this underground vault. So it did take that. The initial one that it did, it actually showed the behair right here, which I didn't want. I thought that kind of gives away the plot too much. I do love that cover, but it actually misspelled it just said TH. So I said, screw it. I want something a little bit more subtle and less revealing, so you don't give up the ghost right away for the big bad evil guy. So that's just kind of, the process I went through is spent probably about an hour and a half prompting and going through the different aspects of the adventure and asking for the rollable tables, asking for the sections or the chapters, and then asking for the pogs, and then asking for some other additional elements. So these are just things that you'll come across if you're going to use AI tools. For now, for the time being, it's been fairly consistent, and it hasn't given me too much grief, even with the stat blocks. And I think it's because I added a new updated stat block conversion tool for the 2024 5e rule set. So it kind of knew already what to do for a stat block format. So that was cool. And then it knows what rollable lists are. And it also has an idea of the type of adventure layout that I look for, which is descriptive elements like narration, obviously the title, location. If it's an encounter, if there's any tactics, or a short explanation of a puzzle. It just depends on the area and what you're trying to feature for every section. So honestly, I think this adventure could probably be played in 2 to 3 sessions. I don't know if one would do it. You might be able to get halfway through it and then, maybe get another quarter of the way and then another quarter of the way of the total adventure itself. So it kind of depends on how much you play, how many hours. But let's see if ChatGPT could pace this for me and give me an idea of how many hours it might take to complete this, including combat. So I assume combat's going to take about an hour. So that's just a rough estimate. It could be a little less or a little more, depending on how proficient you are with Fantasy Grounds and how complex and how detailed the NPCs and such are. So I'm going to go back into ChatGPT, and I'm going to say, based on the previous context from our conversations above, what would you estimate the total play time to be, including exploration, all the pillars basically, combat, and role play allowances? So we're going to add that in because some people like to role play. And I kind of like my adventures that I write or try to make or use, or even if a published one is, usually it's about 50% combat, 30%, maybe for puzzles and role playing and such. So and then 20% might just be strictly just getting from one place to another, exploration kind of. And I guess that would include puzzles and traps, but that's kind of how I do probably a 50, 30, 20 type thing. And I might flip-flop those around depending on the type of adventure. So if you were doing like a horror adventure, you might say, okay, there's 30% combat, but there's like 30% combat, 50% role play, and problem solving maybe might be 20%. So it depends on the ratio and your play style and your group. But I usually try to do 50, 30, 20, and I might flip those around depending on the type of adventure it is. You got a mystery, there's a lot of discovery, role playing, exploration, that sort of thing. So that might be 30% instead of 20. And then the role play may be 50%, and then combat 20%. So it really kind of depends on your group. So anyway, so based on the previous context from our conversation above, what would you estimate the total playtime to be, including exploration, combat, and role-playing allowances? So I'm going to let it analyze the conversations and kind of give it a stab. I'm thinking probably about 5 to 7 hours, but we'll see. Estimated total playtime. So here it goes. It's breaking it down pretty well. So Journey to Cavoric's Crown could take 1 to 2 hours. For me, it would only take 1 hour. So that's exploration at the most. The Bonebreaker Rift might take 1 to 2 hours. Stealth, traps, RP, or combat with kobolds. So I would say that's a good 3 hours. Or 2 hours. So with those two combined, probably your first session right there. Then you get to the Rat Warrens, which is an optional thing. So if I include that, that's going to be under an hour. The Shrine of Ancestors, that's investigation or potential combat. So there's another hour. So there's 2 hours. And then Hall of Broken Thunder, which is lore discovery. That's where the, you're getting close to that hammer. So if I played all of those, you're looking at 3 or 4 hours there. And then the finale is the lair, and then the aftermath and return. So that's another 2 or 3 hours. So 7 to 11 hours to completely go through it. I think I could do it in probably about 8, maybe. It just depends on what unfolds, but at least you get a rough idea. So this would be more like a 3-shot, to be honest, 3 or 4. So that's kind of the thing I like to look at sometimes. When you build stuff, how long is it going to take you to go through it? How much is it worth for your time to do all this stuff, that sort of thing. And then you can have it do a pacing sheet to help new GMs. You can create a quick hooks and recap summary for sessions 1 or 2 openings. You can prepare optional fast play suggestions for convention or one-night runs. So that's kind of cool. I might do that, but in this case, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do it, but you get the idea. So that is a kind of a cool thing you can do with an AI tool, is kind of get a rough estimate of how long the stuff's going to take. And so just doing the images alone for me for this particular adventure, with the tools I have and experience, probably a couple hours at least. I mean, solid, maybe 3 hours total. And that's a big chunk of the work, is doing all this. And then the next thing I'm going to work on likely is the NPCs. So that's copying and pasting all those into Fantasy Grounds. And since they're already kind of formatted and I have the artwork done, it's going to be a lot quicker. So maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours on those, depending on how I do it. And then I would do all the rollable lists or the tables. And then I would maybe put line of sight on maps. So that's another hour or 2. So you're looking at, probably about 10 to 12 hours to build this adventure from top to bottom with art and everything. So, and that's, assuming you only work a couple hours a night. So you got to kind of learn your pacing and learn your best practices in Fantasy Grounds. And I think the best way to do it is handle it in chunks if you have that capability. Some of you are kind of doing it as you go, which I think is a little bit harder. It's easier in the short term, like you just make one thing and move on. But if you're going to do that time and time again, like, I'm going to make an image, now I'm going to make a stat block, and then next time you're going to make a stat block and a map, and then when you jump around like that, you lose more time than anything. And so if you have the time, who cares? But if you don't have the time, then you might need to think about how you want to approach it. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. But I think the creation of this content is rewarding in some cases. Some cases it's just a bunch of work. So it really depends on, what you're trying to show in your story. Like, how do you want to tell your story? And I like the idea of having maps that are not too complicated, but they get the job done. So this thing here is just a regional map, and it's like a progress thing, right? So you don't have to really even show it. It could be just for you to kind of just remember where they're at in the adventure. So this is more thematic and more narrative type tracking. And I use a party token, just kind of move this thing across the map. Then, like I said, you have these images here. And those would be more for combat if you're going to do that. This might just be for spatial reasons, like maybe you have players that can fly and you want to show that. You can do stuff like that. Here's the throne room area. There's another view of the chasm. This is the rat pit. This is just a generic image, so you can just lay down and use for your combat. And you notice there's no grids on here really, and that's by design, because I don't want to try to have to line all that stuff up. It's just ridiculous. I'll just pick a grid size that will fit and it makes sense, kind of narratively and scale wise. So I might try to line up some of the grid lines with some of these bricks, but they're not all perfectly 5 or 10 feet wide. They're different sizes, so I wouldn't even bother. But I might try to line up roughly with these pillars over here, or these supports, These are actually arches that are supporting the walls in the tunnel or the cavern hallway. So anyways, that's basically the first step, is get all your images worked out. So what I want to do is go through and export just the stuff I want to export. So I'm going to do all the stone borders first. So on these here, these are all going to be roughly 1000 by 1000, or maybe I'll just leave them. They're at 1024 right now. I'll just leave them. That's how square this background is. So I'm going to go, let's see, page 3 to page 8. So share, go to download, and then I'm going to select the pages. So let's go take off select all. So I want to go with 3, 4, 5. There we go. So those are the borders only. And now, since it has all of this stuff, like this large area here, I might need to change the dimension before I render those. So maybe I'll break it up even smaller. So instead of these things being, you know, this big square, maybe I'll use, maybe just make it a sliver. Maybe make it closer to the size of this instead of trying to render it as a full square image. So when you're trying to place this inside of Fantasy Grounds, in the reference manual, if this image is 1024 by 1024, it's not going to look right. You're going to have all these gaps of space around here. Even though it's a transparency, it's still going to be a big white gap. So I may want to change how I render these. So probably save these for last. These are finishing touches, polish. They're not as important. So let's do the cover. So this is going to be a full size image. And when you render these things, you want to make sure that you don't pick up any of these background, if you have background like this white or black background. And then I'm just going to do page 9. So I'm going to go to share, download, and we're going to leave it at 1024 by 1024. That's the dimensions. But what I might do actually is take this image and put it in a different format. So maybe it's 1024 by 780 or something like that. So let's see what the dimension is. So yeah, so this is 680 by 1024. So I might go like this, copy this, or duplicate it, however you want to do it. And then you can come up here to editing, you go to resize, you go to custom size, and we're going to go at 1024 by 680. No, it's 680 by 1024, excuse me. And then what we'll do is we'll say copy and resize. But then I don't know if it's going, let me see. Yeah, it's going to do all of them, and I didn't want that. Resizing to 2 designs. So yeah, this isn't exactly what I wanted, but nonetheless, you could do that to, make these things a little easier for you to deal with. So let's just do this. So let's go to create a new design. And what we'll do is custom size. And that was 680. We're going to do 680 by 1024. 680 by 1024. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you place this in Fantasy Grounds, you're going to have these big gaps on the side. So I don't mind having a little buffer in there, but I don't want that whole thing. So create new design. So it's actually going to take the whole image or the whole design object, and we're going to put it in there. And this is what I'm looking for, is something closer to the size that I want it to be. This is really close. And now what I do is I'll render this by itself. So I go to share, and go to download. We want to click on transparent background because we don't want to pick up this white border here. And then I'm going to go to download. And by the way, this is a paid version of Canva, so you may not see some of these features if you're trying to do it yourself. So I kind of messed up. I wanted to say cover image underscore storm coil. Something like that. There we go. Let me do it again. So download, transparent background, download. So once you have images ready to go, like this one, I guess, is kind of ready, then what you do is you go into your downloads folder, wherever that might be, and you just cut or copy. So I'm actually going to copy this because I want to keep a fresh copy. And you go into Fantasy Grounds and you start dumping those into your assets area. So this is a new campaign. So if I go to assets and click on images, then I want to click on folders. And it will pop up the backend folder of this particular campaign. And I'm going to hit Control V as in Victor. So at this point, you may want to name this or rename it before you do anything else. And that's basically how you manage these. This is also a PNG file, so you may want to convert it. So I'm going to open this with, I'm going to go with Gimp. Right now it's about 1.26 or 1.25 megabytes. Not a big deal if it's just one image, right? I'm just going to close that. So this is the image, and as you can see, the edging isn't there. It's transparent, which is good. I'm going to hit File, Export As, and then I'm going to change the name to WebP because that's the format, and then click on Export, and it's going to come up with this. So Fantasy Grounds recommends 75% image quality. So that's kind of like the amount of compression, I guess. And I don't mess with the alpha quality, which is your transparency. And that's the only thing we mess with is the image quality. You can go a little higher, a little lower if you want, but that's what they recommend on the developer portal for Fantasy Grounds. That's what they use. So we're going to go ahead and hit export, and it's going to export into the same folder that I had open earlier. So now if I'm going to preview it, and this file now is only 69 kilobytes compared to 1,261. So that's the compression ratio. That's pretty darn good. So that in itself is a big space saver. It doesn't really necessarily help with performance per se. It does a little bit with transferring the image back and forth between you and the players, and it saves on your hard drive space. And if you ever created content for Fantasy Grounds, they have like a 100 or 200 megabyte cap for their modules in most cases, because the time it takes to download and update those takes forever if they're huge files. So they try to keep it down in the file size. So that's why you would use WebP. If you're going to compress it and make an actual adventure that you want to list on the store or share with your friends, you don't want this big 2 gigabyte thing. You want it to be as small and as efficient as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this file here. I'm going to kind of work ahead a little bit. So this is the images folder, which is the main directory for this, but I'm going to say, I'm going to do a new subfolder. I'm going to call this Adventure Images. So this is just like the covers, those bar thingies, the borders I was working on, that sort of thing. So that way I kind of have them separated. So I'll have one for the handouts, one for the maps, and then one for the additional stuff. So this is your organizational part, which is very important to do this in the beginning. Because once you start associating it with content in your campaign, it's going to get It's going to get really messed up if you don't. So I added that image. Right now in this campaign, I don't have a campaign folder yet, and that's until you add something, then it will make one. So if I hit this refresh folder assets, now there's a folder called campaign. So this won't show up until you put something in the images folder or in the tokens. So this is just a heads up. So if I click on that, here is my adventure image subfolder. Click on that, open that up, there you go. So there's a preview of the image that I just put into Fantasy Grounds. So that's kind of what you do with maps, handouts, NPC images, not the tokens or the pogs, but the stuff that you can either show or use as part of your book. So this is something that you're going to be doing for all of the different images. And it's really important to have a name or some kind of naming convention so that when the items are listed in your images area over here on the right under your campaign, you're going to have the ability to sort and also to get an idea of what type of image it is. So I'm going to use this drop down and click on this green add category button in the images section. And right now it's called group 1 by default. So what I want to do is edit this name, and I'm going to call it Storm Coil of the Dwarven Deep. So that's the name of it. And then this will be adventure, I'll say. And then the next one will be like NPCs or handouts or whatever. You can do it separately, or you can put them all in the same group. In this case, since it's not a full-length campaign or adventure, I'll probably just put them in one group. So Storm Coil of the Dwarven Deep Adventure. So that's the group name. And also that'll be separated away from anything else I have loaded. So that's kind of a nice thing. So this is where that's going to go. So there's a couple ways you can add these. You can share this with players, you can make a quick map, you can set this as your background decal, or you can create a map record. Or you can drag this into this area, however you want to do it. So if you click on create map record, it's going to create it in this group. Or there's another way you can do this by importing all the images at once, which I think is a better way to go in the long run. But you got to have everything sorted, everything in the right folders, everything named, that sort of figured out. Or you can do it one at a time. In this case, I'm going to do it one at a time for this first image, just to show you what's going on. So you can either left click and drag this image into here, or with this image here, the preview image, you can say create map record. So we can click on that, and that's the actual image record now. So cover underscore image underscore storm coil. So you do this systematically with all the images that you want to show up in your campaign that you're going to share or use in your game. The other stuff that I had made earlier, those elements that weren't really adventure elements, but these things here, I don't think I would add those there, but they would still be assets that I'm going to use to create the cover page for my book or a reference manual. So in this case, this is just the image. I don't need to do anything to it. There's no line of sight or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is title this book cover, and then I'm going to unidentify it. So when I share the image, if I do, it's only going to say book cover. It's not going to say cover underscore image storm coil. So this is the way to kind of mask what the image name is, so it doesn't give it away, but it gives a brief description of what it is. So that just says book cover. And I can even say, we'll say storm coil book cover. Front. Just like that. So that would be something you could change. Now you could add fog or whatever you want, but in this case, this is just the cover of it. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to go ahead and lock that image, and that's okay. So this be something you might share at some point in the adventure. Maybe not in the beginning, maybe in the beginning. It's up to you. But now that this is ready to go, this is now a shareable record. If I right click on this and go to sharing, I can actually share this record with the players if they were going to connect to my session. This case, this particular session I have is a work campaign, so I don't have anyone connect to this one. This is where I'm doing all my work. When I'm done, I'll export everything as a module and create a new campaign. And that keeps the play records away from the original records, and it also gives you some separation, and it's also a lot less confusing in the long run. Short term, now it's kind of a pain in the butt, but in the long term, it's worth it to do something like this. So this is just one thing. So when you go to create your book, which is your reference manual or whatever, however you want to call it, under books, if you click on books, you can start a campaign book. You see I already have two other things loaded. So this is the Panovo effects coding and the primer guide. I kind of use this as an example. So like this is a full on, like here's the cover. Here's your credits, your table of contents, that sort of thing. So this is what you would eventually build after you get everything kind of together. What I like to do is create this directory or these headers, and that way you have your table of contents. You got your chapters broken up. So that way when you're building these things, everything's done. And you can just build like the basics for the headers, and then later on you're going to link everything to these pages as applicable. So there's some stylization here. I was saying earlier, I'm going to use those dwarven elements to kind of deck like she did here. This is an image that was used to kind of make this look a little bit nicer. So that's pretty cool. And then like for the races, you got, and then the pages will, you got these embedded images. I like how she feathered out the images so it kind of blends in. So these are the kinds of things that the little final touches if you want your content to look polished. You don't have to be this organized necessarily. You can just put text and throw some images in there. But if you want it to look nice and you want it to be organized and easier to run, then you might, go get into this more. So these are just little tidbits that you've added to these pages to make them more interesting. So these are just things that, you have to consider, what do you want to do? I kind of like the artwork to be a little bit more alike. These images were created by different people with different AI tools, so that's why they look so different. I don't mind the diversity. It's just that a lot of them look like, I would say there's like 4 or 5 sources. So it kind of looks like multiple artists worked on it. Whereas in this case, the one I did here, it looks like 1 or 2 artists instead. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. So anyways, I'd click on campaign and start a new chapter. So this might be a storm coil. Storm coil of the Dwarven Deep. And that's going to be your kind of like the section. And then what I'll do is I'll put, let's just say, we'll just say intro or something like that. Or setup, however you want to do it. I think I'll just leave it like that. And then new chapter. This will be the cover image. You could do it like that, or a new subchapter if you need to. So it just depends. So cover image. So this you might put, there's your page, and then what you're going to do is click on image block, and then you can drag over your images that you've imported earlier and worked on into that block here, into this header, or you can do it from assets. In this case, this is going to be an image that's linked that I'm going to be able to share. So I'll just drag this in here, drop it, there you go. So there's that. So this is just kind of, the very basic steps. So I'm going to be going through this and doing little parts of this in videos so you guys get an idea of the process. Here's a cover image, storm coil. If you click on this, it brings up the original image. So that's why I linked it there. If you link it from the assets, I don't think you're going to get this pop-up window. It's just going to be embedded in the thing. I have to test that out, but basically that's how this works. And then what I'll do is I'll create a new page. There's the cover image, so there's a new page, and we'll say storm coil of the Dwarven Deep. And when you lock this, it sure do look kind of neat. So this is the image name, basically. You click on it like that. What's this? Open the storybook. So you can go back and forth. It's kind of cool. And then what you do is the next page, you might have your intro or whatever you want to call it. So if I go back into my ChatGPT session, I'm going to ask it, request that it takes and rewrites the first part of it. So I'll say, please rewrite the entire setup, intro, and such for the first part. So it'll go back. I'll say, please review, rewrite, and organize the entire setup, intro, and such for the first part of the adventure in plain text only. I don't want a bunch of formatting and that sort of thing. So I've already went through this, a few hours ago. I was asking for this stuff, and instead of doing it all at once, I did it in 3 parts because I thought it would be a lot better and a lot more concise, and it wouldn't be jumping around and forgetting things as much. So you kind of have your choice here. So this would be, let's see, storm coil Dwarven Deep. We got that. And then adventure title. Okay. So I guess this would be your info page. So I'll just put info page. Maybe I'll call it something else later, but that's what this is going to be. And then this is going to be a text block. And then I'll copy this information, whatever I think needs to be included in there. So adventure setup, this will be the first page here. So this will be all your info. And then I'll right click and you can clean that up and get rid of the extra lines. You can format the text. So maybe you want that to be the kind of your header. And then you can bold. Once you learn the shortcuts in Fantasy Grounds, all the control keys, this gets a lot easier. So this is just the the information, and then I might put an extra line or space in there, make this a header, and then go into this. And then it will say the resulting elemental fury. Okay, so the adventure premise is deep within the craggy peaks of Cavaric's Crown mountain range. The long-forgotten vault of Cordron lies buried beneath the stone and shame. Once a proud Delzoun dwarven stronghold of trade, diplomacy, and craft, Cordron's vault became the site of a tragic disaster. Centuries ago, storm giant emissaries descended from Mount Velgrin, seeking peace and parley with the dwarves. Their negotiations ended in disaster. Anger, misunderstandings, and violence shattered the halls. The resulting fury tore through the vault's chambers, collapsing much of its structure and forcing the dwarves to abandon the site forever. Now strange lightning storms haunt Mount Velgrin. Kobold tribes whisper of Vortholax, the storm coil, a monstrous god of fangs and lightning that slumbers within the ruined vault. Dwarves of Runegate, guided by the sage Bargram Runetone, seek brave adventurers willing to descend into the forgotten halls of Cordrin. Their goal is simple in word, but perilous in truth. So this says, recover the lost Delzoun tablets, the lore and relics from the ruined vault before the kobolds, storms, or worse, destroy what little remains. So I actually might make this a text block in case I want to send this to the chat. So what I'll do is I'll hit Control, I believe it's 4. Nope, Control 3. There we go. And then Alt Tab. Oops. No, it's Control Tab. And then I'll say Game Master or GM. So what this will do, in case, you can either read this or you can send this to the chat. So in this case, it would probably say something like that, and it'll say this is what the GM says. You can do that. So that's your first part. This is your info page. And then you'd add another page. So in this case, here's the adventure starting point. And that's what we're going to call this. Adventure starting point. And then we will add another text block. And what I might do is insert an image on the left or right, depending on how you want to do this. So let's take a look. Like if I had more images ready, then I could do it. But in this case, I'll probably just do the text because I don't have all the images ready just yet. So what we're going to do is take the starting adventure point, copy this, paste it up here, right click, clean up the text so you don't have a bunch of extra spaces that you don't need. You can always insert a space if you want. And then I'm going to hit enter, start another line here. So this is your initial NPC. So this is someone they offer in case. And then here's your adventure hooks. So we might add all this in here for their starting point. So this Bargram Runetone is an NPC like quest giver, essentially. And then what you might do is, go through and format the text depending on what your needs are, like how you want it to look when you're presenting it. And then you decide, how do you want to do it? What's the best practices, that sort of thing. So these are just things that you're going to come across in case. So maybe you will, maybe you won't need all this stuff. So this is some information that might help you out. And then you have these adventure hooks. And then here are the words again. So again, this is text that you can send to the chat. And then you hit Control Tab. And this would be Thaldric. This is the NPC that they offer in case you need an extra hand. And then these things here, this adventure hook summary, I can make those into bullet points because these are the different adventure hook summary things. So these are things that you might do in the adventure, depending on how things go. Kind of suggestions too. You don't have to do it in this order, but these are kind of the summary of it. So recover the lost tablets of stone lore, investigate rumors of storms and kobold activity near Mount Velgrin, discover the fate of the ancient Delzoun vault of Cordrin, retrieve dwarven relics, weapons, and art, learn what truly happened during the ancient storm giant parley, and confront whatever now dwells in the ruin. So those are kind of your, the things that you might be getting into. And then these are, like, this is the NPC ally. He might look, there's some look, his mannerisms, his motivation. So you kind of have an idea of how to play him in a sense, or a suggestion on how to play him. Possible dwarven relics or object arts. I didn't make those, but this 500 gold coins upon return with proof of the recovered tablets. Probably going to have to make a parcel for that so I can award the players. So be careful on how much loot, treasure, and special items you give out, because you're going to spend a lot of time on those if you got too many. So the adventure begins in the dwarven settlement of Runegate, a fortified mountain community built in the lower slopes of Cavaric's Crown, which is kind of a mountain range. The players have been summoned or contracted by Bargrim Runetone, a respected dwarven sage and lorekeeper obsessed with covering lost Delzoun history. So to me, it sounds like he's a nutcase, and that could be problematic. It's kind of up to you, though, how you want to play it. And then there's some more words. So you could say this one, or you can put them together if you want. So I'm going to say Control 3, and then Control Tab, and this is Bargrim, by the way. So these are his words. Control Tab, Bargrim. So these can be sent to the chat as well. So this is just the formatting stuff that you'll get into. Here's the offered award. So when I get to this part, I might create the parcels all at once and then link it here later. So what I'll do as a placeholder is just put a space there and Control 5. And that's just a blank link. So later on, that just tells me, oh yeah, I need to click, add something there. So this is just your, like your starting point. And then what you would do is start another page, and this one is the journey details. So you might do something like that. There's your header, or your page name, title, another text block. And what we might do is take this text, copy it, paste it up here. Journey involves, let's see. Okay, so the Vault of Cordrin. This is the journey details. So I'm going to make a header up here so it looks better, or nicer anyways. So that is going to be a header. So this is just kind of like, some of the stuff you might do. And what I might actually do is insert that map. So the image that I have kind of shows the areas. So I might insert that in this page somewhere. And then this talks about the vault location. So what I'll do is continue down here and kind of get the rest of this. So this is the journey details. So there's the vault location. This I don't need. Bonebreaker Rift, a deep canyon carved from ancient seismic activity, marks the fractured outer approach from the Vault of Cordrin. Here the global tribe, known as Embercoil, lairs in fear and reverence of Vorthulax, the Behair, Scoreth, the Stormcoil. So then you might put a picture of that there, it just depends. So that's basically how you start piecing these stuff together. But the real work comes in when you're putting all the images in, and then you're building all the NPCs, and you're building all the items, building your tables. So you want to get all that done before doing any of this. It's okay to have like your pages set up, just the headers, so you kind of have an idea of the structure, like the skeleton of it. and then you might have a new chapter. So I'm going to say proceed with part 2, and like the info above. So it's going to break down. So this would be a new chapter. We'll say, no, say this is part 1, and then new chapter. Part 2. And then you do the same thing, make all your sub chapters if you have any, new pages. So you just systematically go through. Like, here's a table I need to build. So this is kind of like, the work part of it. Once you get everything organized, get everything outlined, get all your images named, get all the text organized, you start adding this stuff in as you need to, and it'll come along. It takes some effort though. So right here, this is, oops, Control Z, Control 4. So these are, some of the phenomena you might come along the way. So it can take a bit to do this. It's not necessarily a walk in the park. So you got to be dedicated somewhat. Spend an hour or two a night working on it if that's what you want to do. So it just depends on what kind of time you want, or just use an adventure that's already set up, so you don't have to do a bunch of this. But if you're doing a lot of homebrew, this is the type of stuff you're going to be facing. Or if you want to modify something that exists, like maybe add in your own parts, you kind of have to do some of this. So anyways, folks, I think that's enough for now. I think I'm going to call it. But this is kind of a continuation of what I was doing yesterday, which was doing all the prompting, discussing how, the best practices and some of the pitfalls that you'll run into. Talking about, how you prompt things, like instead of saying a map, you just say a top-down drone view with these features, and once it has a style established, you can just say, hey, I want you to make the image in the same style as the one above or the previous conversation, so that it keeps the style kind of the same. And I don't mind this artwork here, or this generated image, because it kind of has that storybook fantasy look and not digital 3D video game style. I do like that style, but not for this adventure. So anyhow, folks, you guys have a good rest of your weekend. And